Good morning, everybody. I'm Robert Scheer, and this is your 6 AM Wakeup. Let me first apologize in advance that this podcast might be a little longer than typical. And let me also say that this podcast is deeply personal, and I'm just going to recount some of my own life events. I want to start off by saying I do not subscribe to this theory that happy, healthy people do not have regrets. I think all of us have regrets, and I don't think it's a bad thing to examine those and probe those and understand them. And when we get to the 8th step, we're going to talk a lot about making amends, and that is a really good way to address regrets. One of my deepest regrets is the effect that my addiction had on my children when they were growing up, especially in their formative adolescent years. And as I reflect back on it, and I also look at other families and I see the way they address and deal with their children, I'm very aware of many of the shortcomings that I had in my parenting. And the best way I can describe it is what I call the Buoy theory of child raising. Children really need anchors in their life. Life can be challenging, it can be turbulent, and their anchors are most often their parents. And what happens as your children grow a little older and reach adolescence, those waters become even more turbulent. The waves get higher, and you want your kids to develop independence. So imagine the kids swimming off by themselves in the water, but they always look back and they know where the buoy is, and that's you. So as they get older, they swim a little further. And in those adolescent years, when the waves get high, they're looking back to make sure that they can see you and find their way back. And in my case, when my kids were teenagers, I was at my worst. I was at what they call the bottom, and that bottom lasted a long time. And I was essentially, literally and figuratively, missing from my kids' lives at the time that they needed me. And so let's come back to this buoy analogy. They're in adolescence. They're starting to date. Their sexuality starting to develop. They have peer pressure. All of these things make the waters more choppy, more turbulent, and all the more reason you have to have the security of that buoy. And I simply wasn't there. I wasn't reliable. They couldn't swim back to me. I really left them to fend for themselves at a time that was most critical and when they really needed something to anchor to, not something to cling to. I'm not suggesting that kids don't need to have a little pain and experience things on their life and develop their own autonomy and their own independence. But it is important for them to understand that there's safety there in that turbulent ocean, to continue with that analogy. And that's one of my deepest regrets. Now, I will say that my kids have become remarkable. And to some degree, that's God's grace. And to some degree, it's also the power of 12-step program, because it has the ability to influence others. And we'll talk more about that in subsequent podcasts. But for right now, I will just say that the 8th step, which we're going to talk about at some length, which is the amends step, gave me a great deal of relief for the really significant, and in some cases, and sometimes I should say, overwhelming sense of regret I had for missing out and not being available to my kids when they needed me the most. Thanks for listening to my thoughts for the day.